So DeAndre Jordan is in the news, as it seems like he would like to be on the Houston Rockets. He talked with Rockets players throughout the year, saying that he wanted to play there. It's his hometown team. I guess it makes some sense given that he's about to hit 30 years old, and the Clippers seem like they're going to be like around the 7th or 8th seed if he's there next season. And it seems like he just wants to get some more W's, right? Compete for a championship and all that stuff. Well, there are a few complications in him wanting to be a member of the Rockets. Those things being Clint Capela, number one. But also, even if DeAndre isn't going to be on the Rockets next season, I do think there is a chance that this could result in him being somewhere else, either this offseason, maybe he would get traded somewhere, or maybe he would even get moved like during next season from the Clippers to somewhere else. And of course, the team taking him back would have to be a good team because he only has 1 year left if he were to accept his player option. And that player option is very interesting as well because we don't know if he's going to accept that or decline it. Because I'll be honest, for DeAndre's sake, it's not exactly the best open market right now for him. If he were to decline that option, he probably could get that money back, but it would be to a bad team. Because all the teams that have cap space right now are like the Lakers, the Bulls, the Mavs, the Kings, teams like that. Or they're good teams, but teams that already have centers like the Sixers and the Jazz. So is there a chance he could actually end up accepting his player option? I guess it's possible. He's going to know his options better than I will. But if he were to decline it, then it would get very interesting. And before I dive into the Rockets a little bit more, I will also say that this could end up resulting in a sign and trade where he declines the option and then, like similar to Chris Paul, Clippers sign him, immediately trade him to a different team, that sort of thing, right? And I think there are a few teams that you could look at for that scenario. But anyway, let's start with the Houston Rockets. So, the obvious thing here is, do you think DeAndre is better than Capela? I think he is not. I think Capela is a better player. I think Capela, the real difference between them is Capela's ability to defend on the perimeter. Not to say that DeAndre can't do it, but I think Capela's just better at it. And then when you look at their offensive rebounding, their rolling to the basket, catching alley-oops, and just defense around the paint and around the rim, I think they're pretty close with one another. And then, again, Capela's perimeter defense, I think, is the thing that separates them. But that being said, DeAndre is still a very good fit with the Rockets. And this is kind of a bargaining chip in the Clint Capela negotiations for Houston because who knows what he gets offered in the open market, right? Because it's not going to come from Phoenix now because they've made it about as obvious as you can that they're going to sign DeAndre Ayton, or draft him, I should say. So Capela's out for them, but there's still a decent chance that one of these teams that's bad and needs a center that isn't going to select one in the draft could go for Clint Capela, right? And unlike DeAndre, Capela's 23 years old right now, so I think he would be a little bit more on board with taking the money and going to a bad team, whereas I'm kind of getting the vibe that DeAndre might be okay with taking less money to be on the Rockets, or potentially another good team, Chris Paul's free agency impacts this as well. It would have to be a timing thing where you would get DeAndre first, and then you would re-sign Chris Paul with his bird rights. So, I don't know if that really makes a difference, but I think it's worth mentioning. Now, as far as which team actually offers Capela that money, I don't know, because, again, I don't know who's going to get drafted outside of DeAndre and going number one, right? Between Jaren Jackson, Mo Bamba, maybe Marvin Bagley. He's more of a power forward, but the team that drafts him could see him as more of a center. I mean, that's going to affect who throws money at Capela, right? I mean, you look at a team like the Hawks, for example, right? Maybe Atlanta goes with a perimeter player where they're selecting. They're probably not going to, but just for the sake of example, then they could throw some money at Capela. You see what I'm getting at. So if that happens, if Houston is put into a position where Capela is getting a huge offer from somebody and they can get DeAndre Jordan for $5 million less, there's a decent chance they do that. And they give themselves a little extra money to re-sign Ariza, re-sign Chris Paul, and they effectively bring the team back, right? Because what could happen is you re-sign Capela, you re-sign Chris Paul, but Trevor Ariza is gone, right? Or you could have DeAndre Jordan, Ariza re-signs, and then you still have Chris Paul, you know? I think you could argue that that's a better scenario. So that'll be interesting. It depends on what Capela gets, what DeAndre Jordan is willing to take from Houston. Also, Chris Paul's contract negotiations are definitely going to play a role in this, and the timing of it all with bird rights and all those things. I think those are all the potential outcomes with DeAndre and the Rockets. The next thing we can talk about, though, is what this means for DeAndre in general, because, like I mentioned, I do think this means he would be willing to not be on the Clippers. And let's say Capela is still on Houston, and now DeAndre has a choice of, well, I can go to the open market and I can go to one of these bad teams that has a lot of money, or I can accept my player option and just grind it out with the Clippers for another year, and maybe he gets traded, right? Of course, it would have to be to a good team and all that. Well, I mean, I don't know. DeAndre's 30 years old right now. I don't think he'd be totally hyped for, like, signing with the Mavericks, you know? So then he ends up saying, screw it, I'll stay for a year and weigh my options. Or we're going to see a sign and trade. And I think this opens up the floodgates for some interesting things. Now, the team acquiring him would probably have to be good. I have to assume he wouldn't be content with a sign and trade to a bad team, because, you know, he'll probably get like a 40-year contract or so. But still, there is some wiggle room here, and I think the team I immediately think of is the Wizards, who I seem to bring up in trade discussions all the time now, because it seems like Gortat and John Wall may have fallen out of liking each other, and that team just in general seems like they need a bit of a jolt. They also need to just become near elite on one side of the floor at least. You get DeAndre in there, and he could be a screener for John Wall, he could catch alley-oops, and defensively he's definitely better than Gortat is. And I think he could get on guys a bit, which is a thing that team really needs. As far as how that happens, I mean, you have Gortat's contract, you have Jason Smith's $5 million, and you may have to get a third team involved, but it also depends on the contract that DeAndre would be willing to take. You know, if he wants the super max, then it probably isn't going to happen, because then the Clippers would have to take back, like, maybe Mahimi's contract as well, and they're not going to do that. But if he's willing to sign for 22, 23, then you might be able to just get the money to work, you know? And you might even be able to keep Kelly Oubre. You include a first-round pick and some second-round pick protections or so, and maybe the Clippers would be okay with that, because the one thing with the Clippers is we saw with Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, they're going in more of a build for the future type of thing. I mean, they're trying to, like, stay good and stay relevant while also building up the future. But I do think if they realized that DeAndre was gone, then they'd be a little more okay with a move like this. Now, I'm going to assume that there'd be quite a few teams willing to negotiate a sign and trade if this was a real thing. But, you know, that's an idea for the Wizards, nonetheless. I think Cleveland, weirdly enough, could be in the sign and trade market for DeAndre Jordan, because you've got George Hill's contract, which is not guaranteed, in 2020. It's like 1 million guaranteed or so. So it's effectively an expiring. You include George Hill, some distant first-round pick, maybe Cedi Osman, or Ante Zizic, I don't know. You get DeAndre Jordan in there, potentially convinces LeBron to stay, but then the other thing you do is you would then trade the 8th pick for, or you would attempt to, at least. You trade the 8th pick for Kemba Walker, right?
This is a Chucky beat.
So it's like the 8th pick, Cedi Osman or Zizic, both of those guys end up being gone. Now, whether Charlotte would actually be on board with that, I don't know. If that's the best offer they would get, I don't know. There's definitely risks in doing that, but I wouldn't say it's impossible for Cleveland to be having those thoughts, because look, if you've got a chance to keep LeBron James and you can acquire 2 damn good players, and I mean, I think if they acquired Kemba and DeAndre, then I think a series against the Warriors would be at least a little more interesting, and the Cavs would probably run through the East again. Then hey, that'd be something. But of course, there are many factors and that sort of thing, and I'm just throwing it out there, okay? So yeah, the DeAndre Jordan situation is very interesting. I do think there's a chance he could end up on basically any team in the NBA next season. He could end up on a bad team that has a bunch of cap space. He could end up on the Lakers, who sign him and some other big-name player, and suddenly they're good. He could end up on a good team via a sign and trade. He could end up as LeBron's teammate through like 4 different scenarios. I don't know. It's going to be some interesting stuff.